Welcome back. Panel is here. Leanne Caldwell, The Washington Post. Eddie Glaude Jr., Princeton University. David French, senior editor of The Dispatch. Amy Walter, editor-in-chief and publisher of the Cook Political Report. I want to start the question this way. And David, I'll start with you. I think we're headed towards a criminal referral of the former president of the United States, looking for him to be charged as a criminal. Now what?
You know, it's going to be a matter of facts, law, and here's the last bit that's really important, will. So what do the facts say? What does the law say? That's going to be sort of easy to discern after all this is over. In fact, it's already been pretty easy to discern, particularly in Georgia. Georgia, I think, is where Trump's conduct was most brazen, most obviously implicating criminal statutes, both at the state and the federal level. But the question here, Chuck, is will somebody indict someone who may be announcing in the next few months that he's going to run for president again and immediately become the Republican front runner for the nomination? That's where the political will comes into play, and the more brazen the facts, sort of the less bold you have to be. And so that's what we don't know, is how brazen will the facts get.
Eddie?
That's the tragic choice. I mean, the fact is that if we know that he needs to be indicted or he's broken the law in some way, but there's a threat of violence if you indict him. And if you don't indict him...
Isn't there a threat of violence?
If you don't indict him, there is the end of the rule of law. So it's the tragic choice that Merrick Garland faces, I think.
Leanne, what would we say about another democracy going through this?
Well, I think that we would have a double standard in what we would say, absolutely. But before we even get to 2024, there's also 2022 and the midterm elections. And I reported earlier this week that last month, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in a closed-door meeting, she told her colleagues that January 6th is not necessarily on the ballot. People are not going to go to the polls on this. People are going to vote on inflation, on gas prices. But House Democrats in this January 6th Select Committee, she says, are stewards of democracy, and so they need to do this. But I also talked to a Democratic consultant last night who held focus groups after the first hearing, and they said that they were actually quite surprised at how much this resonated with the independents. The focus groups were with the independents, and how much they didn't know before the Thursday night hearing, and how much it really had an impact on them.
And so the question is how long that sticks, right? We live in a culture where minute by minute our attention shifts to something else, and we know by the time we hit November, this will feel like
Johnny Depp trial's
a million
over,
miles away. Yeah, I was going to mention that, Chuck. Thanks so much. So I think the challenge right now is twofold. One, it's what Eddie and David put forward about what does the Justice Department do, but it's also making the case that this is not just about what happened in the past. It's preventing it from happening again in the future, and it's also in the present. And that's the case that you're going to hear from Democrats in the midterm, especially those who are running against people who were either actually around on January 6th, in the case of the gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania, or who were active in some way, shape, or form, or who still can agree that the President of the United States was duly elected and legitimately elected. But to make the final case that this has to be something that's prevented in the future. When I listen to focus groups of independents, that's what they say is, I'm worried something like this is going to happen again. So this committee has to answer the question, how do we prevent that?
On Republicans, though, what was really telling is on Wednesday, the day before this hearing, or it might have even been Thursday, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy was asked over and over again at a press conference if President Biden was legitimately elected. And he refused to say. January 6th, he said, but now he won't. And the reason is because this is so politically treacherous for Republican-based voters, for actually a Republican leader to come out and say that, who knows full well that Biden was legitimately elected, to actually say it.
So that's cowardly. And it's even more cowardly after the Georgia primaries, because the Georgia primaries, you had one-on-one confrontation between the Stop the Steal candidates and Republican establishment, including Brad Raffensperger, who did probably more than anyone prior to Liz Cheney to directly confront, and Vice President Pence to directly confront the president. And they won. They beat their MAGA primary challengers. And yet still, these Republican office holders in Washington are retreating from that question. They're terrified of that question. And yet Georgia just demonstrated that there's a chance here to break the Republicans free.
And that to me is one of the, without pushing you into an answer, I kind of feel like the real measurement of success or failure of these hearings is how strong Donald Trump's grip is on the Republican Party in 6 months, not today or in a year. You know, I didn't know Tom Rice was going to vote to impeach. I don't think anybody here. Tom Rice, everybody had to quickly look up. Who's Tom Rice? People thought it was a mistake.
Yes.
Somebody, there are going to be a few people moved by this who say, you know what, I'm off the train. This was horrible.
Right. So I think there are folks who have made their decisions, right? There are folks on the left and folks on the right. They've made their decisions. But there are these people in between. There are these folks in the middle that we're always talking about, these independents that we're always talking about, right? What does it mean for the committee to connect the dots? You know, I'm a professor, so what do we tell our students when you're writing your paper? This is how you organize it. Tell me what you're going to do it, and tell me what you did. What we saw on January 6th, they laid out the blueprint, the general architecture, the roadmap for what we will hear. So by connecting the dots narratively, they may convince folk. But I want to say this really quickly. We need to stop believing that some of these folk on the Republican side are actually Democratic actors.
Meaning small d.
They are not Democrat. They are illiberal. And when we treat them as typical opponents, we're actually contributing to the problem because some of these folks are using the democratic process to undermine democracy itself.
David, we talked about this earlier. We're going to have a controversial abortion ruling. We have a heavy debate on guns. We're not happy with the state of the world and the economy as it is right now. And we may have a former president of the United States put on trial. We going to hold?
I mean, I believe we'll hold, but I can't say with 100% confidence that we will. I mean, this is the reality that we're facing now. We're facing a degree of division, and it's not just division, Chuck, it's animosity. There's a difference between, say, Auburn and Alabama fans and what Republicans and Democrats are doing today. There is an active degree of hatred here, and it's very hard to respect liberty or democracy in an atmosphere of pure hate.
All right.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.